Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to our special DGAP morning briefing with the title, The Results of Germany's snap election Implications for Europe and the World. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. At 4:11 a.m. this morning, we got the preliminary election results, which answered one question, at least for now, that had been hanging over election night. Would the numbers add up for the so-called Grand Coalition with the center-right CDU-CSU and the center-left SPD? Or would a so-called Kenya coalition be needed, combining CDU-CSU, SPD, and the Greens? The preliminary results show that the new party Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, or BSW, a party combining strong nationalist, anti-migration, and pro-Russian stances with hard-left economic policy, very narrowly failed to enter the German Bundestag. With 4.97% of the vote, it got stuck at the 5% hurdle that German parties need to clear to enter parliament. This now paves the way for another CDU-CSU-SPD coalition. 3 of Chancellor Angela Merkel's governments consisted of this combination. Together, the parties have 328 seats. 316 are needed for a majority in the German parliament, whose number of MPs is now fixed at 630. It had already become clear that the pro-business Free Democrats, the FDP, would be booted out of parliament. The party of former Finance Minister Christian Lindner, who caused the early end of the Scholz government. The other parties, having formed the traffic light government led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, lost heavily too. The SPD, Germany's oldest party, recorded its worst result post-1945 with 16.4%, meaning that the far-right AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, with 20.8%, is now Germany's second strongest party in parliament. Scholz will bow out in the coming weeks and play no role in future negotiations of a future government. However, he managed to win his parliamentary seat against Green Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock in Potsdam. The winner, CDU leader Friedrich Merz, said yesterday night that strengthening Europe would be his number one priority. He said, and I quote him at some length, "I'm in touch with a number of EU heads of states and government. My priority is to strengthen Europe step by step in a way that we reach independence from the United States. And I never thought that I would ever be forced to say something like this on television. But after President Trump's statement from last week, it is clear that the fate of Europe is of no importance to this US government. We will likely need to create European defense capacity much more quickly." And he also said the interventions into our election campaign from Washington were no less dramatic than those coming from Russia. We have 4 DGAP experts this morning to discuss the results, especially what they will mean for German foreign policy. Our 4 experts are Dr. Stefan Meister, head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Central Asia here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning.
Also with us is Dr. Victoria Rietig, head of the DGAP Center for Migration. Good morning, Victoria.
Morning.
Also with us, joining us from Paris, is Shahin, Vallée, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Geopolitics, Geoeconomics, and Technology, and an expert inter alia on Franco-German relations. Good morning, Shahin.
Morning.
And last but certainly not least, we have with us Josef, Senior Associate Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations and the leading expert on the European Union. Good morning, Josef.
Good morning, everyone.
Some quick housekeeping remarks. To start us off, each panelist will have about 3 to 4 minutes for an initial impulse. After that, we will have a discussion on the panel, and about 30 minutes in, we will be opening up for your questions and comments. For the Q&A, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question to the panel in person. You're also welcome to submit questions, comments via the chat function. I'll do my best to bring them to the panel. Please note that the briefing will be recorded and subsequently published, and that we'll have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And with no further ado, let's start this briefing with Stefan, please.
Thank you, Henning, and good morning also from my side. Maybe before I go into the Ukraine-Russia, also US topic, because I think this is now the major challenge, or one of the major challenges for this government, a couple of words on the result. I think what we saw is a doubling of the right wing and partly extremist populists of AfD. So I think Germany is really now in the normal in Europe with this topic of migration and also the strengthening of the right wing populists. We see that the Social Democrats are getting really a small party in Germany. It's not anymore one of the big parties. There's no big coalition anymore. What we don't see is a further fragmentation of the parliament. Liberals are out. BSW looks like that they are also out. So I think we don't have too many small parties in the parliament, which we have also as a development in many other countries. And democratic parties have the overall majority. So it might even be enough for two parties. They don't need a third party if the BSW might not so if the result stays as it is. What we also see is that Friedrich Merz is not very popular. So I think the Christian Democrats gained more votes, but I think it's not very impressive what they got. They didn't enter the 30%. So I think we also see here that the Christian Democrats are not as strong as they may be expected. So moving to what this means for Ukraine and Russia, I think it is important to understand that this election and the negotiation of a coalition agreement will take place with the clear understanding in which geopolitical and security situation Germany and Europe are. So I think that's very different to when the traffic light coalition was elected in 2021. And then afterwards, the big war in Ukraine started in 2022. I think this new government can prepare its policy in the light of the new reality on transatlantic relations and war in Ukraine, while understanding also the urgency of the ability to act on Ukraine and European security. So I think that's maybe a positive news in all this very difficult news. And I think we have to understand for Ukraine, there is no other choice than Europe. So I think there is no US support anymore. And Europe is even more important for Ukraine than it was before. And we will be challenged also by US policy with regard to our Russia policy, which will be used, I think, also by some, especially right-wing forces in Europe. That means Germany has to focus on Europe and Ukraine and needs to understand the reality of US policy. I think the external pressure is now higher than it was with the Russian aggression against Ukraine since 2022. It's even higher. And we had the Zeitenwende speech of Scholz afterwards. Since Donald Trump does not only completely question the transatlantic relations and shifts US policy as a reference point for the norm-based order, but is also willing to make a deal with Putin without and at the costs of Ukraine and Europe. So I think this is even more dangerous because we also attack from inside to some extent within the democratic camp. US pressure to divide Europe now additionally to Russia's politics against Europe and the security pact between the US and Europe is over. A strong Europe or strong transatlantic relationship is no longer in the interest of Washington. And I think for the Christian Democrats, this is also identity question. These transatlantic relations, and it will go. You can compare it with Ostpolitik of the Social Democrats and the Russian war. I think that was also an identity question for the German Social Democratic Party. I think now it's about the transatlantic relations, which additionally are challenged, and that will be also really a test case for the Christian Democrats. I think like for Putin, for Trump, allies no longer exist. Europe is seen as an alternative power center which needs to be weakened. And I think the US will try to separate Europe, break up the EU, and leave Europe weak, fragmented, and defenseless. That means US will have a similar interest than Russia has to weaken Europe. And therefore, I think a new German government has to focus on the EU and on Europe. To please or appease the US is a waste of time, in my opinion, and resources. Berlin has to organize with its allies, and this is not only France, it's also Poland, it's also other members, but I think these are really crucial countries, and in the end, it's also the UK. Berlin has to organize cohesion in Europe on the US, Russia, and Ukraine. And Germany is the key country because of its size to keep Europe together. I think Germany has a particular role in making Europe able to act on Russia and Ukraine in the light of the European budget crisis and the weakness also of France and limits of Poland. But it will only be able to act if it's able to unite Europe on this issue. I think Germany can lead Europe if it's willing to do so and has to spend more money, and it needs to become a key actor in supporting Ukraine in this situation. And I think the whole discussion about debt break, common debts also in the EU, I think Josef will also speak about it. I think this is very urgent, because we have to overcome this ignorance of Europe by German politics. And also being a blocked country and blocking in the end Europe on key issues. There will be no US support for Ukraine anymore. And I think this was inevitable regardless of the election result. Ukraine obstructs two major goals of the Trump administration, weakening Europe to make it defenseless and strengthening Russia to use it against China. And we have to understand that the US will not support Europe. It's simply not in their interest. And our key ally is now only Europe. And Europe cannot survive without Ukraine. And Ukraine cannot survive with Europe. So I think we are even more tied up with Ukraine and the future of Ukraine. And I think we have to look also for alternative allies. I think we have to rethink our Turkey policy in the light of this situation. So I think Turkey is a crucial country also in Ukraine, in the Black Sea region. And I think Germany needs really to play a key role in all this, also in redefining its European policy and its role in the EU. So I think, just to finalize, we need to really, as soon as possible, a functioning government. We need to do the domestic reforms, investment, and refocus on Europe, and preparing, engaging the society on fundamental changes. I think this is also really crucial, that political elites telling the society the truth about what we have to pay for and where we have to take leadership and also have to take risks.
Stefan, thank you. It was a little longer than we planned, but let's go on now to Victoria, please.
Thank you. I have some good news, and that is that these results may actually lead on migration to a little more unity within Europe, simply because we do have this big right-wing shift towards harsher migration policies through these election results. Now, the actual effects on Germany's migration policies in Europe will very much depend on how much of the signature campaign promises the CDU-CSU is going to be able to implement with its coalition partner, the SPD. And just to remind all of us, Merz vowed to stop illegal immigration through various measures. For instance, they want to turn back all people who arrive at Germany's borders, including those trying to seek asylum. They want to bring asylum seekers to third countries outside of Europe, similar to the failed UK-Rwanda scheme, and also similar to the not yet functional Italy-Albania scheme. They want to stop refugees entering Germany legally through humanitarian programs, and they want to decrease social benefits and abolish dual citizenship again, all in an attempt to make Germany a less attractive destination country, especially in comparison with its direct European neighbors. Now, if we took all of these plans of the CDU and CSU literally, that would actually mean a clear clash with the EU, because it would break EU law, and it would mean a clear clash with our direct neighbors, especially in the east and in the south. So with Poland, the Czech Republic, with Austria and Switzerland. Okay? But my advice is just don't take them literally, because the implementation in practice will, of course, be much more middle of the road, because it will be the result of the negotiations in the coalition negotiations. And we do know that the SPD in its electoral programs have actually led quite a lot of maneuvering room in their promises. So there are a few things where the parties are likely going to clash. But the SPD was very careful in how it formulated its electoral program. And there is a lot of overlap between these two parties. And therefore, I think it is quite likely that we're going to that migration is not going to be the major hindrance block that it could have been if, for instance, the Green Party had to be the third coalition partner. Now, the likely outcome, once buffered through the SPD, the likely outcome is going to be a German migration policy that will be more in line with those of our neighbors that have turned more migration skeptic, which includes Italy, France, and Austria, and a Germany that might actually lose its reputation in Brussels as a spoiler in migration negotiations, who in the past has blocked harsher proposals. Now, all of that, as I said, of course, depends on the compromises. And one may have gotten the sense from the last few weeks that compromises, even between the CDU, CSU, and the SPD on migration, are virtually impossible. But we do not sign up to that notion. I do think that there is some substantial overlap. And we in the Migration Center have wanted to not just spread some theoretical hope, but also some practical advice. So we've actually sat down and formulated 7 possible compromises for the negotiations, for the coalition negotiations. And my colleagues are going to put that in the chat if you're interested in some of those details. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Victoria, also for keeping to the time. So very much appreciated. Let's move on to Shahin. We have already heard migration may be not a problem for a grand coalition, but you've also sort of looked into the debt brake and fiscal policy, but this also is connected, of course, to what's going on the European level. So, Shahin, please.
Thank you. Yeah, from my vantage point, and with my economist hat, I think the biggest issue for these elections was whether they would enable eventually a new fiscal policy in Germany. And there's been a lot of conversation over the last few months, and in particular during this campaign, about reforming the Schuldenbremse. And I think a big question was whether we would have a majority able to do that. And importantly, whether we wouldn't have a blocking minority of 1/3 that could obstruct a potential constitutional amendment. It seems with the latest results that the risks of a blocking minority has disappeared, and that there will therefore be a potentially 2/3 majority between the CDU, the Socialist, and the Greens in the Bundestag to pass a constitutional amendment. I think the big question will be in the coming weeks, what is the nature of that agreement inside the coalition treaty that allows for a bigger fiscal expansion in Germany? Are we going to go for something temporary along the lines of the special fund proposed by Chancellor Scholz in 2022, or are we going to enter a more structural reform of a debt brake that could enable, beyond defense spending, increase in investment spending in infrastructure and in other parts of the economy? I think that is going to be, from my vantage point, the single most important question in this coalition agreement. And I think the one that will probably make things the more difficult between the CDU and the SPD in the coming weeks. I also think it is critical because it has, as you mentioned, Henning, quite deep European consequences. Basically, the extent to which Germany enables greater defense spending or greater investment spending in general will, I think, have consequences across Europe on other fiscal policy. And in particular, will also have consequences around the implementation of the European fiscal rules. You may have seen in the last couple of weeks that both the President of the Commission and Defense Minister Pistorius have both openly spoken for relaxing the European fiscal rules and enable more defense spending. I think that is going to be one critical point. And I'll conclude, and maybe as a segue to Josef, I think a connected issue to that will be the extent to which Germany allows greater European investment and greater European spending on defense in the form of either a new vehicle for common borrowing, in the form of a renewal of NGEU, the common borrowing instrument that was created in 2020 as a result of the COVID crisis, or in the form of an enlarged EU budget, which, as you know, we have to conclude by the end of 2027. So I think these two issues, the Schuldenbremse reform and greater common borrowing, are to me the critical pieces to look for in the coalition agreement.
Thank you very much, Shahin. I think the numbers, I'm afraid I'm a little more skeptical about the blocking majority, because the Linke and the far-right AfD together have now 25% of the vote and even more of the seats. My reading this morning was that there is indeed a blocking majority, and then probably the Linke will need to be won over if we want to have a constitutional change.
I'm not very worried about that, because, as you know, the Linke has historically been opposed to the debt brake. So I don't think the Linke will be a major obstacle in the way to passing a constitutional amendment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josef.
Well, I'm not so sure either, because, if the question for a constitutional amendment was about to free resources for defense, either by reforming Schuldenbremse or by creating another investment pot Sondervermögen type, the Linke might be opposed to it, because they are strongly opposed to stronger military spending. But let's get to the point. But Shahin's important point about the EU budget, I think, holds one of the sort of conclusions out of this election. Yes, we will see a new government, we will see a new rhetoric, but we may not see that much of a new policy. I think that the Merz government will start out with a lot of new wordings, but when it comes to the tricky parts, a greater EU budget or EU bonds for specific purposes, I see Germany taking a very reluctant position, which may only change in the course of further events, in which then Germany could come out as the initiator of change on the EU level. But just to follow an EU path that was designed in Brussels, I have my doubts whether the Merz government will actually be ready to do that. We'll see another Merkel coalition, Christian Democrats in the lead and Social Democrats as the junior partner, but without Merkel. So Merz is the main difference to the former times. He has leadership ambition, but the question is, does he have sort of not only the skill, but does he have the setting in which he could then act in the way, and does he know what he would want to do with the leadership potential that he has in his hands? I give a few examples. Unlike Stefan, the Merz government will not write off the United States. They will rather say we need to continuously work on improving the relationship with Washington. And that will, of course, contain a number of the Europe united rhetoric that would otherwise be logical. So Merz will be a chancellor who tries to do more Europe in some way, and at the same time to be transatlanticist also in some way. And that, of course, takes a bit of the spiciness out of German policy. The next big thing Victoria talked about is migration. Yes, I think this is an opportunity actually for Europe to make progress on this scheme, and over the midterm take away from the political discourse one of the most divisive and the most emotionalizing subject in politics. But when it comes to security, when it comes to European policy and defense, I still need to see what idea this government has about what to do. I think we are in a situation where Germany must take an active position, but this active position should be based on a strategy and not just on trying this or trying that. And that will be the litmus test for Merz in his first year. Does he actually have the idea of what particularly the German role in the new strategic setting in Europe should be? How do we deal with European territorial defense on the eastern flank? I think Merz is pretty clear. Germany with Merz will continue to support Ukraine, but continue to live with the same type of dilemmas that the support for Ukraine has been living with, even though Merz is no Scholz. Now, on the other hand, Germany is, I think, in line for greater defense spending. But the very open question is Germany actually ready to change the mode of defense spending? Is Germany actually ready to build a coalition that would try to build defense of scale, would make use of the pooling power of Europe, particularly by bringing together the many smaller nations of East, Central, and Northern Europe, all interested in defense, but all with I don't want to be insulting to them, but with a subcritical defense spending when you only look at the national levels. So will Merz have the will and the strength to change the way in which we organize defense so that we're not only spending more than Russia, but that we're getting something for the money that we spend? So these are the open questions. This is all but clear. I think the upside is the election result as it presents itself this morning makes way for a fairly swift formation of government. That's no guarantee, but it could happen, which means that the gap will be shorter, and that the time in which the Germans then have to find out what they want to do now is coming shorter than it could otherwise be. But whether Merz will be able to use the moment is everything but clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we opening up, maybe just go back to Stefan for a moment. Josef was skeptical about your prediction that a Merz government would more or less sort of no longer bank on the United States and on NATO. I mean, if we take literally what Merz said yesterday evening in this so-called Elefantenrunde, he sounded very much the way you suggested, which is really remarkable given that he's a former president of the Atlantic Bloc, Germany's sort of foremost transatlantic network. What do you sort of how do you react to Josef's sort of prediction that it probably won't be that clear cut?
I don't. So let's say I agree in a way with Josef that I think it would be very difficult. So this is a transatlantic party, the CDU, and they will try to keep this relationship. They also understand that without the US we are not capable for a lot of things. My point was that this is a very different US. So this is a very disruptive US which sees Europe rather as a competitor than an ally. And I don't think that German elites, including the CDU, has already realized that we are already in a very different game. And also the attacks on Zelensky, bonding with Mr. Putin, I think it's obvious that there is a big shift in US Ukraine-Russia policy. So I think Germany and Merz will also be forced to do more Europe and less US, and will be maybe forced also to finish this debt break, because we just need the money to do things, and maybe even have to pay the US for security guarantees. So I think that will be a very transactional approach also on European security, and what the US is willing to apply to supply just for if we're paying for it. Yeah. So that's why I think it's, we have to be realistic. What is possible with this US government? Maybe I just pick up from the chat this one question on.
Maybe let's wait with that for a moment. I just wanted to bring in Shahin as well, because Merz sounded very Gaullist yesterday night. Is that something which is appreciated in Paris, or what is the expectation of the Macron Élysée in terms of getting a new chancellor?
Well, I think France is very excited about getting a new chancellor. There's been such discouragement over the last few years about the Macron-Scholz dynamic that almost any chancellor at this point would have sounded to Paris like good news. The fact is that Merz, at least when he was not chancellor, has spoken several times in ways that I think were very compatible with the French view. He actually complained several times that both Merkel and Scholz had not responded to Macron's open hand on a number of issues. So I think there is genuinely in Paris hopes that this is the beginning of a new dynamic between France and Germany. Now, I would maybe join Josef and considering that there might be a bit too much hope in Paris about that, and that at the end of the day, a CDU chancellor is still going to be slow-moving and quite conservative on issues related to common defense integration or common European borrowing. So there might be a bit too much hope in Paris, but I think this is probably the best set of circumstances you could think of, having the US withdrawing from Europe and being so openly critical both of Europe and of Germany in particular might provide the best opportunity for a Franco-German rapprochement.
Thank you very much. And just briefly bringing Victoria in again, do you think, sort of, if we look at transatlantic relations, if we have a sort of quick reform of the German migration law policy, would you think that would also help sort of stabilize relations with Trump-Washington, or is that really...
No.
Possible?
I don't.
What is the question at all? Yeah.
I don't think that there's going to be a huge impact of German migration policies on the US, on the transatlantic relationship. There is a quite big impact of US migration policies on Europe now, because so many of the people arriving at the US-Mexico border are actually from the direct neighborhood of Europe these days. So I would not think that migration policies in themselves play a large role in this transatlantic relationship. No, definitely not.
Thank you. And a quick comeback question to Josef as well. You skirted a little the question of whether Merz would get behind things like Eurobonds, like a sort of unpacking the big bazooka on the EU level when it comes to find the money for European rearmament. What is your sense? Sort of, would you suggested rather that Merz would come up with his own proposals? What could those be, or what is your sense there?
Well, I did spur, that's true, but because I believe that Merz will be more open to Eurobonds if it was his own idea. You know, if in his own trying to mobilize the resources that he believes would be necessary to provide Europe with a better defense capability, he has no other means than this. Then I think he would want to get to that idea, but he would not want to give that chip to Ursula von der Leyen or anybody in the Brussels policy community, or to other EU member states who are, in his view, only waiting for another reason to have EU-denominated debt. So this will be the typical German reluctant position, even in a time like this. And I think we need to bear that in mind. I think the key question will be how serious does Merz really take the situation? Is he closer to Stefan's view or not? If he says, well, we still can't rule out that it might not get as bad as it could, then we will see the typical German policy to do something, but not too much. To change some things, but not too many, and to move in a new direction, but not too far. And that, I think, is the great temptation that his government is now facing. It may be helped by a couple of external factors. The way that the Washington-Moscow axis will develop over the next weeks will be very decisive. Then you will hear comments out of Washington how ridiculous it is that Merz doesn't simply form a coalition with the AfD and command a solid majority and can do everything he wants. The Trump administration would not believe why somebody would be so stupid to form a coalition with the Social Democrats. That could help him to understand better how deep the friction is that Stefan spoke about. But I think when it then comes to Germany's economic interest, to its trade interest, there will be a lot of pressure on Merz not to rock the boat, to find a smart response between holding the European ground, but not being too harsh in a trade war with the United States, because after all, Germany has a lot to lose from that. So you see, this is what I'm a bit worried about, that the momentum of a new government, which every new government has, will get lost in the many obstacles and the many constraints that Merz will be facing on the way, which could only overcome if he had a clear idea of where he wanted to go.
Thank you very much. And we are past the 9 o'clock line, so let's get in some questions. 2 hands are up, and I encourage all of those who submitted via the chat also to maybe put your question in person to the panel. But we start with Tom O'Donnell, please. Keep your question. Introduce yourself, please, and keep your question short. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Tom O'Donnell, and I'm with the Wilson Center in Washington, but I've worked, as people know, I've worked in Germany for many years in energy and geopolitics. My comment is along the lines of taking a little bit of exception to what Stefan's analysis. He said quite clearly a couple times that there will be no U.S. support for Ukraine. So all I can say is I've been listening very carefully to all sorts of people, not only what Hesgef said to the NATO 11 days ago. If you listen to his whole talk, listen to Michael Waltz, the new National Security Advisor, but also General Petraeus, who would have been Kamala Harris's Secretary of State, and he's not saying anything much different. They're all saying if there's not a deal, Trump's team, it's clear they're preparing for 2 big pressure points. One to really hit him with low oil prices and different sanctions. Another thing is to really give weapons to Ukraine. So this is not, the fear is, what we see here in Germany is the AfD, Sarah Wagenknecht, and certain sections of the SPD and the CDU, although they've mostly gone over to AfD already, who are really pro-Putin in a certain way. And I'm not seeing, there is a group like that of the MAGA, but from what I'm seeing, the people in charge, this is not what they're doing. And I'd just like to challenge that and also see what Herr Janning thinks about this too.
Thank you very much. There's Milan, please.
Thank you, Milan Nij, Senior Fellow here at the DGAP. 2 quick questions. One, you haven't discussed the unexpectedly good result for Die Linke and the reasons for it. It has to do something with backlash to Merz AfD vote and different sort of take on migration. My second question would go perhaps specifically to Josef and Stefan. and it's about the pledge of Friedrich Merz that on the first day of becoming chancellor, he would symbolically go to Paris and Warsaw at the same time. When he said this in a speech, I think at Körber Stiftung, I heard that there was rumblings in Paris, also from Élysée, saying that this is undermining the exclusive German, Franco-German relationship, which can only move Europe forward. Merz is signaling that he understands that he needs to bring Poland wholeheartedly on board. How thought through sort of idea or policy this is beyond symbolism from Merz and from CDU, do you think?
Thank you very much. And we also squeeze in Anastasia, please.
Thank you. Tell my question from the chat. I'm Anastasia Pochumbani. I'm also a research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. And I have two questions. One is, Stefan, you mentioned that Merz might bring the leadership, but I have a question to you and also perhaps to others. What does this leadership mean in the current context and in the context of Ukraine? What do you expect? Do you expect some dramatic changes, also considering that the US is pushing very quickly for negotiations? How can Germany bring Europe to the table? And my second question, what do you see the implication are for Central and Eastern Europe, not only Poland, but also the other countries, Romania and the Baltics? Do you see perhaps more engagement to the east, or do you see that the policy will continue as it was? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think most of the questions were for Stefan, so maybe you start and then we see who else wants to come in. Stefan.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So I'm really skeptical about this. Just coming back to US support, we will have to see. Yeah. So, but I really think if we also see how Trump attacks Zelensky, and I think also the Hunter Biden story, he still wants to have a revanche for this, and he really does not like Zelensky. I think there is also a personal issue, but I think what these ruling elites in the US now want is to get rid of the Ukraine topic and focusing on Middle East and on China, and maybe even using Russia against China. I think they have this idea. This is in the discussion. And I think this is the danger I see, that for them, Ukraine is just not important. It's just not relevant. So why not to get rid of it to deal with the really relevant topics? So that's why I'm very skeptical about further US support for Ukraine. And I would even say that they will start to make trade deals with Europe in challenging security guarantees. So if you want security guarantees, then make compromises on trade. So they will link also other topics where we are dependent on the US to make a better deal. And I think this is just the reality in which we are. And that's why I'm very much afraid of this lack of support. On Merz and Paris and Warsaw, what Milan asked, I in a broader sense, I tend to more agree with Josef that there might be not so big changes in how they will behave. So they will do a little bit more, and I think there is an understanding. We have to bring in Warsaw and Poland more. It's more important now. Weimar Triangle is somehow a good vehicle for this. These are the two key partners of Germany, and I think Merz also, when he came back from Ukraine, did a stop in Warsaw. So I think he understands also how he has to deal, or that he has to deal with Poland. So I would rather. I don't know if it's really a well thought through approach, and we also see with the Weimar Triangle, it's not really functional. Yeah, in many ways, it got some functionality with some statements and reactions to but in policy making, I'm not so sure, because the differences are just too big on key issues in several areas. Yeah. So, but we will have to see. I think maybe this new environment and focusing on security brings all together, because I think as well as France as Poland, they are both able to do more on security. Yeah, so and Germany is here more like a junior partner, but an important one because we have the money also to spend and to cooperate on this. So maybe last question on how to bring Europe on the table. I think only if we are ready to be able to supply. Trump wants to make a deal, and then he wants to hand over the security deal to Europe. So if it's about troops, if it's about peacekeeping forces, if it's about funding of Ukraine, reconstruction, military funding, and so on, if we put something on the table, what we are willing and able to supply, then I think we are to some extent on the table. I think that's the only way to be there. And more engagement towards the East was the other question. So I don't think so, to be honest. I don't think this is a priority for these elites. And there are so many other topics, yeah, which are so important, and it's now really dealing again, focusing even maybe more focusing on Ukraine and on defense and on economy. So I don't think that there will be a bigger interest into the wider East.
Thank you very much. Is anyone else want to come in, Victoria?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the question about the good results for the Linke, because I think that is an important one. Milan said, well, perhaps this is a sign of that there was a backlash to Merz's behavior of the last few weeks, especially. And I think that could be one factor explaining this extremely high result for Die Linke, which was a tripling from just a few weeks ago. But I really think one big secret here is the young voters, because Die Linke was the #1 party for first-time voters. A full 27% of first-time voters voted for Die Linke this time. And that's an increase in the percentage points of 19, so 19 percentage points up. And you can clearly see that this has been moved directly from the first-time voters last time, which overwhelmingly cast their vote for the FDP and have entirely deserted them again. So I think that is this is what you have to remember, also thinking about long-term, where are we going in Europe, and kind of where's the young generation going, because not just those 27% voted for Die Linke, but also an additional 19% then for the AfD. So 1 in 2, so 50% of young Germans voted for either Linke or AfD. And I think that gives you a perspective of what to expect in the next election. But really also is an expression, I think, of this great frustration of the young generation with the polio crisis, etc., where they really think that the current political system just isn't working well for them. That's one point I wanted to make. A second point I wanted to make on the bad performance of the CDU-CSU, because they had been polling above 30% for a long time, and now they came crashingly down to 28%. And I think one of the key reasons of why that might be is that when people are asked who is actually responsible for the high number of asylum seekers in the last few years, more than half of respondents say it is the CDU-CSU, kind of harking back to the Merkel years, etc. So I do think that a lot of that dynamic and kind of that heritage of 10 years ago also still played a role today in this election.
Thank you very much. Shahin and Josef, they both wanted to come in. Shahin first.
Yeah, very briefly on migration, I'm struck that and I'm bringing the economic perspective here. I'm struck that the question of immigration has been so important, and that no party has really said how much Germany is actually suffering from a shrinking labor force and from the aging of its population, which will mean that actually immigration is necessary over the coming years in Germany. I think so. There's a long road to travel in Germany for that realization to sink in. And rebounding on Victoria's point about the vote of the youth, what I find even more striking is the polar division between young female and young male. Young female are disproportionately voting for Die Linke, about 30% of them, and young men are disproportionately voting for the AfD. And I mean, this is this gender gap is something you've observed in many elections across Europe now, but I think it's reached a new extreme in Germany with this election.
Thank you very much, Josef, please.
First wanted to get back to the question that Thomas and Donald raised. Yes, I can see the Trump administration using increased or the threat of increased support of lethal weapons to Ukraine as a bargaining chip in dealing with Moscow. But I think ultimately, or at the bottom of the American position is, like Stefan said, is to get rid of that problem. They want to get their hands free and are ready to acknowledge realities, as it is so often said in Washington, and granting Russia a zone or sort of zone of influence that at least is the territory east of NATO and the EU. So I don't see that that the Trump administration has sort of a double agenda and could also go hawkish on the Ukraine issue. I think they are now down that line. They want an agreement, and they will have to give for that agreement, and they are ready to give for that agreement. Now, on the other questions, Poland and France, that's where we see how new this German policy will actually be. Will it be that kind of symbolism of being in Poland the same day as being in Paris? That is a gesture, but not more. The true question will be: is Germany willing to expose itself to take a new role in organizing security and defense in its neighborhood towards the east, together with Poland, for example? And if so, Germany would have to do more than visit Poland first. I think Merz would have to reflect on the question is, can I be leader without enough skills to mobilize followership? What does Germany have to offer to the Scandinavians, to the Baltics, to the Poles, the Czechs, and even how would it deal with Hungary and Slovakia, and down to the question of Bulgaria and Romania? Now, these are the questions that will decide what Germany's role is. And Merz could be driven to become more active in that sense because he's also looking at France and the UK. And he sees that the UK all of a sudden has reappeared as a European power after having been sort of disappeared into the abyss of Brexit for a couple of years. Now this week they will go to Washington. What power resource does Germany have to match sort of the potential or the possibilities that France and the UK have as permanent members of the Security Council, with a veto power there, as countries with a small but sufficient minimal nuclear deterrence capability? So if Germany has to have sort of some power currency of its own, it can probably only be that it is the defense leader in an area where maybe there are strategic interests of France and the UK, but neither one of the two is very much engaged in that area, and particularly France is not the key military player in East Central Europe. So this may influence the German government into becoming more active. Whether it will be the case, I think, depends on more than on Merz, because he has a coalition government with the SPD. The SPD has not come out as very creative in that sense over Scholz's past years. Scholz actually has spoken out against any form of directorates, against any forms of variable geometry in his time as chancellor, and Merz will have to discover that issue. He is on the record only with sort of the traditional CDU type of pledges for Europe, but in a situation like this, you need to be much more specific in order to be credible enough as a political leader.
Thank you very much. And I suggest the last 7 minutes. Oh, Victoria, very quickly, please.
Apologies. I just wanted to give a footnote to what Shahin said. He said that the parties in Germany did not acknowledge that Germany needs migration. I very much disagree. Nearly all of the parties did say that and emphasize that also in their electoral programs, from the SPD, the Greens, the Linke, even the CDU and CSU. They're very much pro-labor migration, pro-legal migration. So I really think that there's a bit more differentiation here. And should I pick up one of the questions in the chat on AfD in 4 years, or do you want to take it over?
Maybe I'm trying to sum up everything which is in the chat, and then sort of
go for it.
Invite the panel to pick up whatever you want to address. If I sort of noted it down correctly, there's a question about whether increased support for Ukraine can be done in a government which still includes the SPD, with the SPD rather sort of, especially when it comes to military aid, not as forthcoming as the Greens, for instance, and even the FDP. Is it possibly a problem in a future Merz government? There's also a question about whether the new government will do something on sort of increasing tech and digital sovereignty vis-a-vis the United States. Another question, probably to Stefan, is that whether it would make sense, if you mentioned alternative partners, and so on, if Central Asia plays a role in this. Then there is also the question about the role of China. Will this sort of how will the next government approach China? And is what we have assumed that Merz will be tougher on China is still viable in this new transatlantic context? And then there are two questions, sort of more domestically. One is whether increased Ukraine help will actually sort of further strengthening the extremists, and a question about whether the AfD will come first when the next election are due in 2029. Is this something you can wouldn't rule out, or is it too soon, or sort of how would this new government play out vis-a-vis the extremists? Since but on that, my personal view is that a two-way government probably is better than a three-way government, because you've got a larger opposition, and the AfD is not the only sort of show in town. So with that, let's go through the panel again, starting with Stefan, and please have an eye on the clock. It's only 4 minutes we have left. Stefan, please.
So we will see with the support for Ukraine if there's Social Democrats also in this coalition. I think, yes, there will be a discussion also in the SPD how to end the war. I think peace was an important narrative also of the election campaign. But then at the same time, I think under Scholz, we saw Germany becoming the second biggest supporter of Ukraine. So I think there might be like a how to say, the fight inside of the party. You have the Pistorius wing, also Klingenbeil, I think, has changed a lot of with more the left, like Mützenich. So there might be a division also in the party, and the question is who gets which position. But I think, yes, SPD will always be a kind of a hindrance to really do a much bigger support for Ukraine. But we will have to see how far Merz is really willing to go in this support after Taurus. So strengthening the extremists because of Ukraine support, I don't think that AfD got so many votes because they are for peace and they are pro-Russian. I think, yes, there is an electorate for this, but I think the main topic is, in my opinion, is migration. And we also see that BSW did not get so much support in the end, and I think peace was their main message. So it looked like they didn't enter the 5%. So yes, it is a topic for the society. It has been picked up by the ruling coalition. But I don't think this is the major driver of the support for both of them. And on Central Asia is far away for Germany and Europe. I think it's important for in some areas, but it's all authoritarian countries. So I don't see them becoming really partners for Europe, and I don't think this is a priority neither for the EU in the end nor for Germany in the way they communicated. While Turkey is really crucial for Europe, it's much more integrated also economically with the European Union. And it's in terms of geopolitics as a NATO member, I think it's in a very different basket than Central Asian countries. So you cannot compare this. In this sense, I think we need to rethink our Turkey policy despite all the problems.
Thank you very much, Victoria.
Yeah, very quickly on, are we going to have AfD as the number one party in 4 years? That, in my view, will depend on two things. It will depend on how functional this government is going to be. So are people going to get the feeling that the center can actually deliver? Namely, the feeling that they haven't had in recent years. And the second thing is on whether the AfD cuts away its members that are fascists. And that the Verfassung should perhaps changes its classification of the party being, at least in parts, right-wing extremists. So if the AfD actually becomes interested in compromise, because we should not forget one thing, the AfD has extreme electoral success because they are being extreme and not open to compromise. So I wonder in how far, if you kind of look into the future, if they actually are willing to move away from that recipe that has proven them so well. I haven't seen indications of that, but if they did that, then I would not rule out that the AfD becomes a part in a coalition agreement in the future.
Thank you very much, Shahin.
No, concluding word on these fiscal issues, which I think will dominate not only for the short term, because as you know, Germany doesn't have a budget for 2025 voted yet. So I think that will be the first emergency of this government. And maybe it will have to invoke exceptional circumstances in order to relax the debt brake temporarily. And then, decide on whether it wants to go the route of a new SPV or a real ambitious constitutional amendment. And I think the Chancellor has said pretty strong things in the last few days around the future of NATO, really questioning that future, which I think by German standards is a really bold statement. And around the fact that Germany and Europe needed to chart a path independent from the US. And I think this is a very momentous statement. So I think, the war in Ukraine will decide over that. But these are pretty stark and important moments for the German political system and for the German economy.
Thank you very much. And the last word to Josef. Henning, please.
Somebody has asked about the new cabinet, which is, of course, not to be answered today, but just one thing. I think one of the indications, the early indications of how active in foreign policy and security policy terms the Merz government will be is whether the question is, will this new coalition have a social democrat foreign minister or not? I could see Boris Pistorius staying on the Austrias, remaining as defense minister, and the CDU demanding the foreign ministry. And so for the first time in many years, we would have the same party, and hopefully, if that happened, people that get along very well, that the chancellor plus the foreign minister, that could actually then combine the foreign policy potential or resources of this government. If it goes to the coalition partner, then we will see the same old game that we have seen so many times, the chancellor moving into one direction, the foreign minister moving into slightly a different one, and both of them neutralizing each other to a certain degree.
Thank you very much. I heard the rumor that Markus Söder is quite interested, the CSU leader, when it comes to the Foreign Office. So,
okay, then I take back my prediction.
And then again, SPD leader Lars Klingbeil is also sort of rumored to be quite interested in foreign policy. So we'll see about that. I didn't bring it up because I thought it's maybe too speculative, and normally it's a convention in this coalition agreements. That first the coalition agreement is sort of being hammered out, and then it's being talked about positions and personalities. But it's always good to look a bit into the future. And your point, Josef, is of course very Very valid. And with that, I bring this briefing to a close. Please join me in thanking our 4 panelists, Stefan Meister, Victoria Rietig, Shahin, Vallée, and Josef Henning. We're looking forward to welcome you again at another DGAP morning briefing. I have to apologize. I don't know when exactly. I think it's Tuesday week where we'll see each other again. So until then, goodbye and have an interesting week with a Germany in a flux, but maybe it will soon see another government. Thank you very much, and you have a very good morning.